Hello everyone. This is a very famous Bobby Fischer game where Bobby Fischer won in 21 moves against international master Robert Bryan when Fischer was very young at the time. So let's get into the game. Robert Bryan starts with d4. Fischer responds with knight f6. Bryan plays c4, g6, the king's Indian defense, and Bryan plays g3. The most common move over here is knight c3, and it becomes a regular king's Indian. But g3 was played, and Fischer plays c6, which is interesting as the main line over here is bishop to g7, fianchetting, and then castling later. So instead of that, play c6, as I already mentioned, bishop to g2, then there's d5. Now this d5 has to be played right now, or else say if something like bishop to g7, there's e4, and after d5 there's this e5 line, which is going to be a real problem for white, as this pawn is in a bit of a trouble. So now instead of that, there's d5, pawn into pawn, pawn into pawn, knight to c3, bishop to g7, a very natural moves, e3, short castle, knight g to e2, knight to c6, short castle. And now, what do we do with these bishops? They both have central pawns right here. And Fischer sees an idea where he brings the bishop here. And to bring the bishop over here, he has to play this pawn. Now, Robert Brand copycats, and there's b3, bishop to a6, bishop to a3. And now, this position is very symmetrical except for these two files. And this is move number 11, and black won in 10 moves. So now this bishop is causing a bit problem over here. So the rook moves, and now Fischer is telling Brian that he wants to play e5 to break open the center and to get some piece play with his pieces. So here Brian develops the queen, as you can't really do much about this. There's e5, pawn takes pawn, knight takes. Now this pawn is apparently free over here, but Brian can't take it because of this bishop takes, there's bishop takes knight, and there's an overload tactic over here. So now black will be a bishop up. So instead of that, after knight takes pawn, there was rook on f to d1. This was a mistake, Brian's first mistake in the whole game. Now, ideally, this rook, when it was back over here, was playing a really important role of defending the f pawn. That'll come into picture a bit later. But over here, the best move is to move the other rook to here, so that this rook can defend the pawn. And you'll see in a couple of moves. So after rook fd1, there was knight to d3, a very solid move. The knight is blocking these two pieces over here, making them technically useless, and this bishop is doing a good job of defending. So now over here, white plays queen to c2. Now he's threatening rook takes knight, bishop takes, queen takes. He'll be an exchange up, having two pieces for the rook. So now pause the video and try to think of what Fischer played over here. Alright, so Fischer played knight takes f2. Now he's trying to lure the king out, and that's why if this rook was over here, there could have been some rook takes pawn, rook takes knight, and then this king wouldn't have to come out. So now this king takes, knight to g4 check. So white plays king g1. There's knight takes pawn. That's a family fork. And obviously white saves the queen. And now what should black do? Should black take the bishop or should black take the rook? Now, looking at this, the bishop is literally the only defender that's doing something to protect the white king, and it's opposing this bishop over here, so that this bishop cannot be a demon. And what is this rook doing over here? Uselessly slopping on the d1 square. So black understood that white's bishop is definitely slightly better than this rook because, as I told you, it's defending the king. So Fischer sees that and he takes. Now white takes with the king, obviously. And now pause the video to see what black did. Now, the whole idea behind this was to get rid of this bishop so that this bishop can come around and do some threats. So if the bishop directly moves here, there's knight to d4 and game over. This pawn is blocked, this bishop is useless, and white is just material down. So so instead of that, he plays d4 first because this pawn was anyways useless on d5, and now this diagonal will be open no matter what. Now, white takes with the knight. There's bishop to b7 check, the whole idea. And now, the king has a few squares to go. It can go to here, g1, f1, and f2. If the king moves to f2, queen to d7, and now the queen will come in like this, and there's almost a certain checkmate. If the king goes back to g1, the line transposes back into this line when king g1. If he does this, there's a small tactic. Can you find it? Pause the video to see. Alright, so black takes the knight with check. Now, if white takes, which probably he will, there's a deflection tactic, rook to e1. Now the rook was defending the queen, and if the rook moves, the queen is gone. And if the king moves, the only other legal move is queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and rook takes rook. So black can't do that, and after bishop b7, he plays king f1. And after king f1, queen d7, and it's game over. White resigned. And according to Fisher, this was a bummer that White resigned over here because there's a really nice variation that would have come on board. So basically, what Fisher documented in his lines was Queen f2. But let me explain why White resigned first. So right now, if the queen comes over here, this square will be covered, and now this bishop over here is covering this square, and this rook is covering these two squares. So something needs to cover the f2 and g1 squares at once. And who can do that? The dark-squared bishop if it is on e3, d4, or c5. So the whole idea of Fisher was to play bishop to h6 and bishop to e3, and the white queen can never ever take the bishop because this queen e3 check and queen g2, and the queen would have to be defending that pawn. So if white plays queen f2, this queen to h3 check. Now the king is forced over here, and now can you spot the tactic? So now the rook is defending this. You can't see the queen is defending the knight because if the queen ever takes the knight, there's queen g2 checkmate. So, and if the bishop takes, there's a pin. So what does white do? Rook check. The rook is sacrificed. And now the white queen cannot take because of g2 checkmates. So there's rook takes d1, which is forced, and then bishop takes d4, and the queen is pinned, and there will be checkmate over here. The only way for white to stop that temporarily is knight e4, where the queen is gone, and if not, queen to d4, there's queen g2 checkmate, and the game is over. Thank you for watching. Bye.